All right, guys. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm here with Nathan.A, somebody that I consider absolutely a friend. I've gotten to know over the past 4 or 5 years. We strangely do something very similar in two completely different ways. It's pretty rare that you find somebody that's doing nearly exactly what you're doing and they're not a competitor. So we've been able to just really partner up and talk to each other about any number of things. But we definitely like to get together and geek out about people creating impact in their communities through the facilities that they already have. And so I want to say welcome to you, Nathan. I'm so thankful to spend a little time with you this morning. We could kind of just like jump right out of the gate, man. Tell me who you are and what it is that you're doing.
Yeah. So again, Nathan.A, Ministry Solutions. My background very quickly is I was in private equity and commercial real estate, and I became a Christian at Buckhead Church in 2010. Was a huge, impactful moment or event in my life. And I wanted to, really wanted to walk with Jesus in full-time ministry and figure out what that looks like. And it turns out that working on church staff was not what I was called to. How
did you find that out? How did you find out that working on church staff was not your bag? It wasn't your thing.
I may have been the director of operations for a church for all of about 3 months. And as much as I loved the church, I'd come out, all the private equity and commercial real estate stuff is just super intense and a little bit cutthroat. And it was just it was such a different environment for me, and just realized that this may not be my jam, honestly. So
the Lord's going to use me to impact people in a different way, potentially. Yeah.
And it was such a surprise too, because, becoming a Christian at North Point, I had no idea that North Point is this mammoth church and they're so influential around the country, and was fortunate enough to get into a small group with one of the trustees of the church who ran what they call their strategic partner team, and which is now the Irresistible Church Network. And he just said, hey, we're coming out of the recession. We have a bunch of churches looking at real estate and have questions about financing. Would you mind just taking a look and seeing if you could help? And so in my mind, I'm just going to have a couple conversations and see what I could do to help these churches. And then, Justin, that is how we accidentally started Ministry Solutions. And last year, this is really fun. But last year was our 10-year anniversary, and we crossed over $1 billion of volume for churches that we have both funded and the projects that we've managed. And so basically, churches hire us to figure out all the real estate and finance stuff, and we kind of take them from point A to point Z in those projects.
And so I'm going to clarify. You just said billion, right? Did you say billion with a B?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, no, it's. I mean, there's a couple big projects in there that totally sway that number, but. Just been so blessed, man, to see God take, even when I wasn't a believer, and I didn't know him, he knew me, and just orchestrated this beautiful story to use my background and experience to serve his church. And bro, I'm just very, very grateful for it. It's been a lot of fun.
That's awesome, man. Would you say that, because obviously, you were in ministry, you had this big heart for like zeal and everything, like, hey, how am I going to win people for Jesus? How am I going to serve the kingdom? Do you feel that, and I know the answer to this question, so I'm throwing you a little bit of a softball here. Do you feel that your impact in the kingdom has been consistent with what it could have been if you would have worked in a traditional church? Or do you feel that you, okay. I'll let you go ahead and answer. I think you know where I was going.
No, not even remotely close. First of all, I've always not been a great employee. Very independent. I would have driven a church staff into the ground, likely. So, but no, I think God's calling on me was that there is my small part I get to play in his very beautiful story is really related to a lot of the buildings and how we use them to reach people. I mean, you know this, bro, that the church has changed significantly, and buildings, digital, these are just tools for ministry. And I think a lot of times we make the mistake of thinking that they're the strategies, but they're not. But the mission to reach people with the message and hope of Jesus Christ somehow got coupled with that happens on Sunday morning. And for me, especially with my background, swore I'd never step foot inside of a church. I think part of what God's calling me to is to help the church uncouple those ideas and realize that, we can use our buildings differently, and we can look at digital as something that's not a threat to our in-person experiences. And like, how do we go out into the world with this message and create different value propositions that get people to come to us? And that's why I'm excited to talk to you today.
Yeah, man, that's awesome. So for everybody that's listening, you could probably already start to see a couple of the similarities of what we do and how we can work together in a lot of different ways. I tell people, just to kind of clarify some of that for people, I tell people what we do at Space Together is kind of B and C class real estate. It's everybody that is just kind of your folks that 500 or less. We're trying to activate our space in our community. Nathan works with the top tier organizations in the United States, some of the biggest and best churches, some of the most forward thinkers. And so he's being really humble in how he's talking about that, even though he did say the word billion a second ago. And so he helps with a lot of the folks that are just kind of not what we're really doing, and has done an absolute tremendous job. But, normally when I talk to people and I say like, hey, have you ever heard of my friend Nathan.A? I think your church would be the best fit for them. They almost always comment, is that the Target guy? Is that the guy that wrote the Target thing? So why don't you talk to us a little bit about the Target thing?
No, I would love to. And yes, people I think do know me a little bit more from that more than anything, I guess. But so I mentioned I was in private equity. And so God gave me a very curious mind. And, going back then, how you figure out deals and looking at markets and evaluating, different opportunities. So when COVID hit, I'm talking to all these churches and I'm hearing this question of, are we going to become avatars in the metaverse, or are we just going to hunker down and wait for everyone to come back?
Yeah.
I just, the question bothered me. It just really bothered me because, like we've been working with churches for years, and in my opinion, COVID did not necessarily change anything as much as it accelerated 20 years of change down into a 2 to 3 year window. People were already coming to church less frequently, and people were consuming more content online. These things were already happening, right? Yep. And so in my curious mind, I said, well, interestingly, like retail has already gone through this. They've gone through this over the past 15 to 20 years, the Amazon effect that everyone talks about in retail. But what was interesting to me as I started poking around, you see Sears and JCPenney take a nosedive, and you see Target, Home Depot, Walmart, all of a sudden just meteoric explosions to the right. So they're facing the same threats. They have the same headwinds of change pressing down on them. But why did Target go crazy and Sears go out of business? I want to know. And so as I dove into it, I will say this: I think it's probably one of the most relevant case studies of what is going on in the church right now. And I know we get a little weird. We start throwing around, business terms and companies that may support things we don't believe in. I don't care about any of that. Here's what I care about. Target sold $90 billion last year of perishable goods, and we have the imperishable message of Jesus Christ. Maybe by the way, they're reaching the people we want to reach better than we are. So I'd love to know, what it is they're doing and how we can learn from that so that we can be effective in reaching people with the gospel. So Justin, and you've read the book, so you know this, but here's kind of the backstory. 2014, Target was also on a trajectory down. They had a distressed stock. They were announcing the closing of stores, and Brian Cornwell, the new CEO, steps in. 5 years later, 5 years from on a trajectory towards bankruptcy, they announced they're opening 500 stores. Bloomberg dubs them the retail model of the future. Keeping in mind, guys, this is the year before COVID. Their CEO is named Fortune CEO of the year, and the stock price goes up 800%. In 5 years. And it's like, man, what happened? And the thing that really stood out to me was the first part. They're opening 500 stores. So we're in a conversation and we're talking about how digital is impacting in-person retail. They make a huge investment into digital, and they're opening 500 stores. They're opening more brick and mortar, not less. And it was just fascinating because all the effects that happen in retail, which is truly a study in human behavior, are the same things that we're going through as a church. And I just felt like, wow, I have to write this. Like I'm learning too much not to share what's going on here. So that's the backstory.
Man, it's absolutely fantastic. I just want to encourage everybody, man, if you have not read this book, pick it up. It's free. It doesn't cost you anything to download it, right? Is it right about that? I mean, you can download this thing. Everybody that I've sent it to has just come back and said, man, this is so eye-opening. This is such a great book. This is something that we've really used, and sent it around to all sorts of different people. So really, really encourage you guys to check that out. I think it's one of the best resources that I've seen Nathan put out. But man, you put out so much content. I mean, oh my gosh, if you guys go to Ministry Solution, you are going to get like a degree in everything that Nathan, and to my knowledge, just about all of that content is free, correct?
Yeah, it's all free, and candidly too. I mean, even the Target ebook, we tried to keep to 15 minutes because we didn't want it to be another book sitting in the stack of books. And we put some team questions in the book also, so that it would be more than just a case study, that it would be something that teams could actually kind of walk through and discuss about how it applies to their own ministries.
Fantastic, man. Again, I want to encourage all of you guys to do that. And, let's kind of not necessarily change anything that, we're talking about. I love some of the things that you talked about, how, Target really designed themselves to impact the communities that they were in. You know what I mean? And set themselves up to where they were almost sort of front facing, like, we have what you need, not the general United States. We have what you need in this
Correct.
community, what you need right now. We know that, and we have that for you. Man, has that influenced how you engage the churches that you're working with, and how you get these mega churches that have the craziest amount of influence and do so much in their community already just through their normal processes? Has that changed how you engage them and get them to activate their spaces and communities?
100%. And I'll to talk about a couple of things that we learned just from Target that were very surprising. So check this out. The VP of digital marketing for Target, oversees all the digital marketing, said, our digital strategy is rooted in the local store. It's not a separate offering. If you don't want to come here, buy online. The thing that really stood out to me was the mission statement of Target. They changed it. And one of the big things that changed, and the difference between Sears, JCPenney, and the others, was Sears and JCPenney saw the digital platform as kind of a one-way broadcast mechanism to get people to the store on weekends. Don't know if that sounds familiar to anyone listening to this.
Yeah.
What the other companies figured out, this was Target's mission statement. We want to compel people to make Target a part of people's everyday shopping experience. So to be relevant to our customer, we have to stop caring when and where they purchase. And when they looked at the different offerings of curbside and delivery and in the store, they said, well, we can't just take one experience and put it on 3 different mediums. Also, I don't know if that sounds familiar. we have to create differentiated value propositions for each experience, right? That makes it unique and gives people a reason to choose that experience over the other two. And they just got myopically focused on, how do we stop caring and tailor our experience to what the customer wants? And the customer wants flexibility. They don't want to go to the Target store every day, right?
Come on, man.
People don't want to go to the church every day. But the beauty of digital, the beauty of digital and our spaces is that if our mission becomes that we want to compel people to make the gospel a part of their everyday life through the local church, we have to stop caring when and how they engage. And the beauty of digital is we can't ask people to come to a building every day, but man, we can bring church to people every day. We can't ask them to watch an hour-long sermon every day, but if we can package content in a way that is consistent with the way that people consume and engage with content now, we have an opportunity to be a part of their lives on a daily basis, and it creates engagement, it creates discipleship, and it creates all sorts of evangelism opportunities that will ultimately drive people to the building. And that's exactly what we experienced in the Target case study.
That's absolutely awesome. I think when we started Space together, there was obviously just like the glaring, really obvious thing that I had already been sharing space with my mentor for 6 years. Yeah. So I knew that I did not need my own building. You know what I mean? Like that was obviously one side that made us kind of say, how can we engage with the community around us and all those other things. But the other side of it was, I was 100% convinced that churches needed more money. That I don't think, and at that point in time, I'd been a pastor for 6 years, so I knew the struggles that churches face, but also I had never really been to a church or met with a pastor at that point in my career where they didn't say, man, we would love to do X if we had Z. You know what I mean? And that Z was almost always cash. You know what I mean? And, we would figure out all sorts of ways to kind of wrap that up or not actually call it money or whatever else. but there was always these two driving factors of like, we want to have more impact and we probably need more cash. And if we had more cash, we could probably have more impact. And in the 10 years that you've been doing this and helping people rethink everything, would you say that that churches really can create sustainable revenue and a sustainable revenue model by sharing their spaces in their community?
Yeah, I mean, I think the probability is very high. So Justin, I think that this does require us to think differently. So like this conversation over activating spaces and monetizing spaces, a lot of times the brains of the people on the call go to, 1990s Baptist church having their own childcare. That is not at all what we're talking about. Or we picture, the Hebrew cafe that no one is coming to, right? So this is not a critique. It's not an attack. It's just a shift in mentality. So when we're doing church projects, understand that those buildings are literally called special purpose buildings, and they're not just built for a church. They're built around the ministry of that specific church. And so every question that goes into the design is, what does the church need? And where this falls flat is oftentimes I'll have that conversation. They go, okay, well, we have an area for coffee. Let's open a coffee shop, but there's no foot traffic. There's no supporting retail. There's no rooftops nearby. And we wonder why nobody's coming. And to be blunt, it's because the community never asked you for that. And real estate is complex, but it's also very simple. It's like every other market. You're successful when you can provide inventory to meet an existing demand, but the demand has to be there. So what we have to do in these conversations is actually kind of flip it and ask the question of, hey, what does the community need from its church? And start with that. And that could be co-working. It could be childcare. I mean, we, in some of the northern states, the churches that have been very successful with this have done community centers that have indoor play areas because if you're in Michigan, it's snowing from November to forever. And so people want to have a place to be able to take their kids where they can play indoors and not lose their sanity from having the kids stuck in the house. But the question does have to start with that. It's, what does the community need from us? There's a lot of research that goes into that. Then you back up and say, okay, what are the complementary uses, the non-competing uses that we can start to think through? And if you're able to do that, not only does it activate the site and bring people on site who otherwise may never show up on a Sunday morning, but the other good news is that people pay you for it. That shift in mentality has to happen in this conversation to where we see our buildings as a resource to serve the community, which starts with what they need. And moving from
100%, man. Yeah. And it is kind of this crazy thing, right? We're like, we are going to start a church that's going to impact our community as long as the impact looks exactly the way that we want it to look.
Correct.
It has to come from people coming and sitting down, listening to our sermons, giving us their money, going away saying they're thankful for our community. If it happens that way, we love impact, but it's not impact to the community as much as it is impact from our vision is what we're after, And I think it's like the whole thing is Jesus says that he is love, right? So like if we really think about that, right? Like if you need shoes, does a building solve your problem? Probably not. Love looks like a pair of shoes to a kid that doesn't have any shoes, right? So it's a community that we are supposed to be providing impact and support to. It would make sense to find out what the community actually needs. Yes. Do we need another church building that does services, or do we need a place where we can have a Christian childcare, or where we can have a reputable after school program that teaches leadership through basketball? I mean, whatever, you know what I mean? But all of those things are possible when we activate our communities with the needs of our communities at the forefront of that topic, right?
100%. And going back to the statement on relevance, and when I study the ministry model of Jesus, I mean, every person he sat down with and ministered to, he met the practical, tangible needs of that person before he spoke into their spiritual needs. He was a healer. I mean, he provided water. I mean, there's just so many different things that he did, but he was always conscious of what that person's like prescient need was at the time. And he spoke and healed that need. And we're not talking about healing and that, but our buildings kind of thinking of them in the same way of, man, if we can meet people as a relevant organization to the community, truly meeting a need of the community, how much more likely is it that they'll engage with us when we ask them to, right? But otherwise, if we haven't provided the value, it's harder to make that request.
Man, I'm so reminded, it's funny that I'm talking to Nathan, but when Jesus met Nathan, and the disciples come around and they're like, hey, there's this guy, we found the Messiah, he's from Nazareth. And he's like, nothing good comes out of Nazareth. And then they're walking up to meet him. So he's never met Jesus at this point. And they're walking up and Jesus says, hey, look, there's a guy that doesn't tell lies. There's an honest guy. That's all he says. He doesn't say anything else about him. He just says, hey, that guy right there, that guy's honest. And then Nathan's like, you don't even know me. What are you talking about? And he was like, when you were under the fig tree, I knew you. And that one step towards just hey, I care about you as a person. You look like an honest guy. I love your t-shirt. Man, I love what you guys are doing in this community. Well, what are you talking about? Well, here is this way that I'm going to support what you're actually doing. And my ultimate goal is I live my life for this gospel. I live my life for the betterment of people. I think this is the most valuable thing I have to offer, is to give you this gospel, this whatever. But how that gets to you is not near as important as the fact that it gets to you. And so if I can shower you with the fact that I care about you, that I see you as a good person and a reputable person, that's one way you can do this. Hey, you guys, what you guys are doing for teens in our community, I absolutely love that. I want you to be doing that in my building. Yeah. Because we're a tool for impact, right? Yeah. And that really does kind of lead me into the next thing that I want to talk to you about. So like if you sit down with one of these churches that already has, let's say this is a group of people, they have 800 people coming on a Sunday. So they're not, this massive organization, but they're big enough. They're almost 1,000 people coming on Sundays, and they certainly have some influence. And, you're sitting down and you're going through your first discovery call with them, and you find out that their community needs X, Y, and Z. What is the conversation like with that church to kind of say, hey, this is the community you're in, these are the resources that you have, and this is how we're going to connect those two? How do you do that? Well,
I mean, if those needs are already identified, I mean, half the job is done at that point. Now, I will say this, I've said this a lot, but I think the biggest mistake that churches make, especially in this conversation around buildings, is allowing opportunities or opinions to drive process. We have this tendency that, if a building pops up, it must be from the Lord. Or so-and-so wants to do this, let's figure it out. Part of this process is remaining extremely objective and taking a step back and really the way we describe it is letting process drive, which gives you the information that you need to ask the right questions that will inform your decisions. But opinions and opportunities really, I mean, it might be a great place to start, but process is what truly drives the success of this. And there is a process of vetting who those people are. I think, Justin, number 2 is mission drift. And a lot of questions that we get in this are, well, listen, church is our core competency and this is what we do. Would this not be, somewhat of a distraction? And here's my take on it. I was raised in the world to value mailbox money. Which is, you show up at your mailbox and there's a check. One of the things in this is if the church thinks, well, we're going to open a coffee shop and we're going to run it. Now you're allocating staff and people who may not have the experience, but more than anything, they're not necessarily the people who wake up and whose livelihood is dependent upon making the coffee shop successful. So I love the idea of bringing in an operator and saying, look, it's your job to get people here. It's your job to sell your product. We're just letting you borrow the space for $20 a foot while you're here. But we are going to stay focused on prayer and the ministry of the word, as Peter would say. And so I don't want this to sound like this is the old school thing of we have to do everything. In fact, I think it's the opposite. I think it's about finding the absolute best operators, letting them come into the space. And here's what's great. If they're really good at what they do, they're going to bring people on the site that would otherwise never be there. Those people you want to reach that won't come to the buildings, you now have someone whose full-time job it is, and their livelihood is based on making those people and making sure those people show up, whether it's a coffee shop, childcare, co-working, event space, doesn't matter. Having that person there, they are working for you, not only for free, but actually paying you to work there to bring people onto your campus. And I think that's ultimately the goal of what we're trying to accomplish here.
Absolutely, man. What are some of the ways, what are some of the cool ways that you've seen some people in an innovative way begin to share their space and activate it?
Yeah, innovative. I'll tell you one of my favorite churches. So before I say this, in this conversation, there's a pendulum between monetary and missional. At the same time, I don't think that monetary isn't missional, because
come on.
we have buildings funding ministry, the more ministry we get to do. I mean, we have churches right now having childcare in every single one of their campuses because it starts the campus at self-sufficient day one.
Yep.
But there is missional and there's monetary. So one of the more missional and successful projects is a church called Chase Oaks. They're in Plano, which is in your backyard. And they went into East Plano and just asked the city. They said, "Hey, what do you need?" And there was a long list of needs. There was no community center, heavy immigrant population. And so there's a lot to say here, but they opened the local goods center, which has a large room for event space, kitchen. They give away 4 offices during the week to immigration attorneys. And it's the only location in East Plano that offers ESL classes at night with childcare. And the childcare is provided by church volunteers.
Come on.
And it's beautiful. There's a food pantry. Here's what's great too. That place is stinking packed. That the event space is booked for 8 months. It's constantly being used. Everyone in East Plano knows about the local goods center. And here's what's really cool though, Justin? On Sunday morning, ironically, there's enough space to put 500 chairs in a room for worship. And there's enough childcare space to provide family ministry for those people. So not only is it a majorly successful, independent, self-sustaining venture, but it provides the church a location to meet at no cost on Sunday morning. And I love that project. On the other side of the pendulum, we worked with a national community church in DC, and give their team a lot of credit for doing the majority of the work on that. But Pastor Mark, if anyone's ever heard of the Circle Maker and those things, he was dead set.
Wild goose chase. Come on now.
yeah, man. Dead set. We have to be on Capitol Hill. And I mean, I don't have to say this. DC is expensive, right? And so long story short, bought the ugliest building we could possibly find on Capitol Hill, right across from the Navy Yard. Went to the Business Improvement District and other places and asked that question, what do you need? And it turned out that the Navy Yard, which is right across the street, was 2,000 spots short on childcare. Wow. That there was all these other community needs. There's no event space in DC that doesn't cost $20,000 a day. And so what's really cool is that it's not National Christian Church Capitol Hill campus. It's called the Capitol Turnaround, and it's known in the community as the Capitol Turnaround. It has a childcare center that houses 300 kids a day, and it has an event space that's used almost on a daily basis. And it has a bunch of other flex space throughout the facility. And what's beautiful about this is that it literally kicks off 7 figures of revenue for the church. And this huge, massive, expensive project was completely paid for by the activation of the space.
Wow.
And there's more,
man.
But we only have an hour.
Come on, man. I absolutely love it, dude. Yeah. I absolutely love it, man. I love it. Fantastic, man. It's so crazy, man, because, at this point in time, we have 50,000 users on Space Together. We have properties in 30 states. And people ask me that question all the time. Like, what's the most innovative way that you've seen somebody use their space? And at this point, it is absolutely insane. The amount of people that have collaborated, and the people that have said, man, we can totally do this. We can find a way to share our space within our communities. I think that probably more than anything, the most important thing that I've heard you say is that we let the community dictate how we set this up, and at the end of the day, that's kind of how any business would work. You know what I mean? Like, if you really think about it, like, it would be like, hey, so we're wanting to start a child care center. Well, why? Because we were passionate about child care. It's like, okay, well, where you place that should probably be somewhere that they need more child care, right? You know what I mean? And if you're opening up your building and you're saying that we want to have more impact, it's probably a good idea to find out what your community needs for impact, right? And the majority of the time, to echo something that you've already said, when we get on calls with pastors especially, the number one thing they say they want to do is a coffee shop. And then, you already know, like, that's hard. Like, ask anybody that has opened a coffee shop from ground up, even in a big city, like, that is really difficult to do. So having somebody that's not passionate about that will ultimately probably be a drain on your organization in some place. Same thing about childcare. Like, hey, we want to open a daycare within our church. It's like, okay, cool. Well, does your community need that? And then who is wildly passionate about childcare in your organization? Is it somebody that lives and breathes it? Because that's also a pretty difficult business to get started. And the third thing that I hear all the time is co-working spaces. Like, hey, let's get in here and let's start a co-working space. And it's like, well, okay, a couple things. Do you have any idea how the co-working business works? Like, do you know how this thing happens? No idea, right? But that one switch and that one change to say, hey, we want to make our space available for the people in this community that have a dream to start a child care center. And we want to help them start or sustain what they've always wanted to do. And we're going to become that resource for them in this community. We're going to be an answer to prayer for them in this community, right? In a very real, very tangible way. You know what I mean? It's that whole thing, like I said earlier, like this gospel that we present really is love. So what does love look like? It looks like an answer to prayer. It looks like you finding what you need, you know? And so, man, absolutely love it. Dude, that's awesome. You know, how can organizations leverage technology and digital platforms like Space Together to streamline this process?
So it's a perfect segue from what we were just talking about, because and this is why I'm so excited about what you're doing. And here we are, like two separate companies, passionate about the exact same thing, and yet like I'm your biggest fan, man. You know,
because I feel the exact same way.
Yeah, here's the thing. So what Ministry Solutions does, we focus a lot on dedicated spaces, right? So when you're talking about childcare, you're talking about coffee shops. These are people who sign leases. Here's the other major unmet need in communities. There are so many groups of people who don't need a permanent lease. There's a dance school who needs the space for 3 hours a night on a Thursday, and they can't afford to go get that space somewhere else. There's people who want to come in and do community events. There's people who want to come in and do trainings. Like, Justin, I mean, you know the list of things, but if we limit our opportunities to what Ministry Solutions does, we're missing out, because there's a lot of people in the community who just need fractional space. They need something, an opportunity to meet at a location, right, and not have to be locked into some long-term commitment. And so, yeah, like in a church building, let's say that we did take our family ministry area and leased it out to a childcare operator for $250,000 a year. That's great. What do we do with the rest of that space? What are we doing with our auditorium and our lobbies and our classrooms and all these different things? And I think the genius of what you have put together is you have this two-sided tool that is basically built to market the church's property to the community and I get excited if I'm a lead pastor, because I'm like, I don't have to go hire somebody to go market this space. I don't have to even pay somebody to manage all the garbage. Like, it's already set up for us, and it's plug and play. And along with our dedicated permanent long-term leases, we are giving people opportunities to use our space when, how they need it. And that to me, I get very excited about the opportunity that you're presenting to these churches, man.
Absolutely, man. I appreciate that. Thank you. Yeah, I love what you guys are doing too, man. It's so fun to see, like, you know, I know when we first started talking to you, we were always working with like a lot smaller organizations. And when I start talking to you, I find out that like the biggest, most influential churches in America are having the exact same question. How do we leverage what we have to have more impact and relevance inside of our communities? And it's so encouraging to me to know that the group of people that we're serving are actually thinking that way. It's fantastic.
They are.
You know?
Well, they are. And I'll share this too with you, Justin, because I think part of it is like when we were first introducing this concept to the church, I personally felt like it was pushing rope up a hill. You know, it's just like, why would we do that? And then,
yeah, man, people getting like
operators
angry, you know, like,
and
you know,
when we came out of COVID and so many things had changed, there was just this openness, and, you know, the buildings weren't full and everyone's asking the question, how do we get more people here? So there was just openness to the conversation. But there's one other big thing that happened during COVID I think everyone needs to be aware of. We were not the only industry impacted. You know, construction costs have gone up 40% in 3 years. Real estate prices have gone through the roof. And this is a cool story. We had on LinkedIn, which I never check, I had a guy reach out to me. He's like the president of some huge childcare company. It turns out it's the second largest childcare operator in the United States, $3 billion a year in revenue. And he asked me and some people on my team to join a call with their executive team. And I'm like, what is happening here? So he starts to explain the challenge they have, that their facilities are full, but they're having a hard time opening new locations because the cost basis for their facilities went from 10 to 15 million and the revenue just hasn't increased enough. And he said, Nathan, can you help us get into 200 churches in the next 5 years? I'm not having that conversation in 2018, right?
Yeah, man.
And what I'm pointing to is it's not just the change is not just happening inside the church. We're also in this moment where other people and other businesses are getting so priced out of the market that our space looks more and more appealing to them, that we're not using Monday to Friday. And that's the beauty, is so many of the things we're talking about have non-competing high traffic times.
Yep. 100%.
They're not there on Sunday. Co-working's not there on Sunday. None of those things are happening on Sunday, but during the week when we're not there, we don't have thousands of people in our buildings. They're there. So yes, a lot of the big churches are looking at this, not even just from a revenue standpoint, but even just a how do we serve standpoint. And it's, by the way, it's working. It's working. And that's the thing that I'm most excited about.
Absolutely. That's awesome. We say this a lot of times, that there's really nothing sacred about our buildings other than the people that are in them. You know what I mean? And the thing is if you take away the cross, take away the doves, take away the huge, paper mache Noah's Ark or whatever we have in the kids' room, if you take all of that away, what is this building? It's a convention center, right? And if you think about the business model of a convention center and a community center, what is it? Let's get as many people and as many activities as we possibly can in here, because that's, for one, going to grow our footprint in the community, and two, it's going to generate more revenue. So the only other people that have a building like a community center or a convention center are churches. And we say we use these 4 times a week max, and we only use part of the building, right? And for me, it's just this concept of stewardship at that point. Like, if you say that your building is a tool for impact in your community, right? I would say, man, I totally agree with that. I 100% agree with that, right? And then you tell me that 80% of the time this tool is not being used for impact. I would have a question like, well, that doesn't line up with what you're talking about. And, whenever we got going in this, and I've told this story so many times, I know that you know it, but I had no intentions of starting Space Together. I was just a pastor that needed to find a building kind of quick. And the thought of going through the commercial real estate process was like, why? I don't need my own building. Like, there's no reason for me to have it. I can partner with somebody in my community. We meet on off nights. Like, this makes total sense for us to just share with somebody else. And then when I went through that whole crazy process, I was like, man, this is insane. Everybody goes through this into a building that they only use like 10% of the time. And then once we got into the building and we actually started sharing our space, we saw this massive impact. Like, I tell people, we had all of these church plants and all of these businesses and all of these nonprofits operating out of our little facility. And it did so many things. But for one, within 3 months, 65% of all of our overhead was covered. So in an initial plant, I had 65% of 2 years of my expenses covered in a quarter, in the very first quarter of what we were doing.
That's unreal.
We were using our cell phones and Craigslist, like literally the most sketchy possible way. The vetting process was absolutely insane. But once we had all these people in our building, we got to the place where it was like 120% of our baseline expenses were covered. And we were having all of these relationships with all of these other people in our community that were starting or sustaining their organizations. It was fantastic. We had this Romanian church plant that would come in, and they would do like a little bit of worship in our auditorium. And then they would come out. We had this big 20-foot table, and they just had a feast, like this huge Romanian feast every single Sunday. And towards the end of their time, the pastor comes up to me and he's like, hey, I just want you to know that, like, we would not be able to impact this small Romanian community if you guys would not have opened up this building. We would be going to some church that really wouldn't be like church for us. It would be us going to an American church. This has allowed us to have a little piece of home and for us to celebrate our faith the way that we normally do. And he said, and on top of that, I've had a hard time because a lot of pastors have an issue with me being both a pastor and a bounty hunter. It was awesome. We were meeting all of these incredible. I know, it was fantastic, right? We're meeting all of these awesome people. And afterwards, when people in our little church would drive by our building, any time of day, any time of night, they could see the parking lot full. They knew that we were impacting our community when we weren't there. And them partnering with us and what they did empowered that to happen. that we always had this. And then on top of that, they knew that our budgets were covered. Man. So when I stood up and I challenged people and I said, hey, this is what I really feel that the Lord is telling me to say today. Everyone knew. It wasn't because I was fishing to have more impact or relevance. Every single person knew it wasn't because I needed their cash. It was because I genuinely thought this is where the Lord was taking us. And it removed all of that weirdness that pastors just face. I mean, I pastored for 14 years. I know what it's like to feel like you need to say something, but also sit and think like, what if 20% of the people leave after I say this? What if we go in this direction and our baseline of givers don't come with us? It freed us up to go where we felt the Lord was taking us from an impact and relevance standpoint. And I love to say this to pastors, and it's always a really funny thing. And it comes off a little harsher than it should the majority of the time. But I talk about what I just said to you. And I say, you know, as a pastor, what would you say to your congregation if you didn't have to think about numbers or cash? And every time I say that, pastors start smiling and they're like, oh man, I would get up there and I would say this, this, and this. And then I say, so how long have you been inauthentic in front of your community for numbers or cash? And around that same time, the air completely leaves the room. And it just draws us back to exactly what you said. If we live in a community and we know that the needs of the communities are not being met, and we know that we have the resources to meet those communities, and we're not even taking the steps to figure out how to solve the problem that we can solve, are we being good stewards of the assets that we actually have?
Yeah, no, and I'm 100% with you. And I'll even add on to that. So you mentioned filling buildings and so much of the focus on that. And then if you look at the church and, you know, every single software program, rating system, like everything is based on attendance, right? Everything is, you know, get as many people to the building as possible. And kind of have to ask, well, why? Okay. We can say community, we can say all other stuff, but here's the reality. There's not a single pastor, if I tell them there's 2,000 people in the room who doesn't know from that a rough idea of how many people are giving, serving, and in community groups, right? So attendance is a predictive analytic for engagement. So if I can build the front end of the system, then I have a captive audience and I can lead them through our 4-step assimilation process. And it's very predictable in that way. We built our entire system around using attendance to create engagement. The biggest change that I feel is happening in the church right now is that our model has completely flipped. Now, in order to get people to attend, we have to have them engaged.
Yeah, man. Wow.
Think about that, right? We had 3 years of training people that it was okay not to come to church and that we could give them the same experience on their couch as they can get in the room. And we're wondering why the attendance numbers are lower when we're asking people to put in twice the amount of effort to get the exact same experience. And that's not knocking that. There's a community element to it on corporate worship. I get it.
Yeah, man, 100%.
But what I'm saying is this. Getting people to attend is so much harder. And so if we can engage them, if we can get them on site and even if it's once a month doing some sort of program, you know, maybe we're taking care of a special needs need in the community, whatever it is. When that person decides that they're at a life point where they need to go to church, where do you think they're going to go? You've eliminated the guesswork. They've been on site. They know what to expect. They know you care about them. They're not going to go to some church that they've never been inside of before. And for me, that's really where the opportunity is that person would never come on Sunday morning, but they can come during the week for a different reason. Gives us an opportunity to connect with them there. Gives an opportunity to build relationship. And when the Lord puts it on their heart that it's time for them to come and meet him, this is where they're going to come. And I think that this is one of the biggest ways that we can drive attendance is by creating a new front door with engagement.
Man, I totally agree with that. I 100% agree with that. And I would be remiss not to say this because we both know this guy and I absolutely love him. And I'm going to give a shout out based on something, but one of my favorite pastors in the world right now is a guy named Greg Lindsay. He pastors Discovery Church in Colorado Springs. Dude is absolutely the man. And, has a big church. I mean, they're not a small church by any means. Nobody would really say, oh, that little church in Colorado Springs, they're a big church. And Greg is the kind of guy that if he wanted to have a bigger church, he could. Like if he wanted to double his attendance, he probably could. But he has this way of keeping things very, very authentic. that drives out some people. And he is right now in the process of he took his logo off the front of the building, and it doesn't say Discovery Church in there. And he took down all of the stuff inside. He went completely brand agnostic on the inside of it. And they've changed how they do everything. He had this big office compound in the back of his building. He pulled all of his people out of those offices. He was like, why do you need an office? You know what I mean? And he built this big, huge, long table that has like a glass garage door. And he's like, you guys work in here, so people can see that we actually work during the week, and then they rent out all those back offices. And the city of Colorado Springs, when they did their New Year's like extravaganza or whatever, they weren't at some convention center or whatever. They were in his church doing the New Year's celebration. Where else do we want them to go? Right. And, I was talking to him just recently, and man, he is facing a lot of pushback right now from people inside the church that are just like, man, is this what we are now? Are we a convention center? And it's like, guys, no. Has church changed? Are we doing our services any different? Are we not offering the exact same thing? But we've expanded our reach massively, that people that would have never walked through these doors are now partnering with us, and they're paying to do so. And I think there's so many pastors that are kind of right there on that edge of like, man, I really would want to do this. I totally see this, but man, my team, my board, my top level givers, they are all going to have a problem with this. And so I would love to ask the question, what are some of the long-term testimonies? Like some people that have done this, they made the switch that I just spoke about, and they have on the back end of it now have seen this pay off in a huge way. Can you share some of those testimonies with us?
Well, yeah, and even Greg is one. I mean, I talked to him. 100%. I talked to him yesterday, and yes, they've gone through that transition. There's always going to be the naysayers. They had record attendance last month, so this has only been open for a few months, as you know, and it brought in over $25,000. $25,000. They haven't even started marketing it yet.
Yep.
So that's 1 month of revenue of just opening up the space. And he was telling me that so many of the new faces that they're seeing are people that they met through other companies doing events in their space. People came there and like, whoa, this is a church. This is awesome.
Yeah,
man. Go come on Sunday. So just in a couple months, he's been impacted. But I mentioned the local good center. I mentioned Pastor Mark, a guy I'm a huge fan of is a guy named Dave Dummett, who's now the lead pastor at Willow Creek. When he was at 242, he opened his campuses opened as community centers. This is really cool. The first one they bought this 100,000 square foot dilapidated, ugly building, but it was in like the prime location of where they wanted to be. And when they were purchasing it, they put a sign on the side of the building that said, "Coming soon, ... you decide."
Oh, wow. Yeah, man.
And so for people who don't know 242, they open those campuses, and Dave's humble and he jokes about his sermons not being that great and all that stuff. But what he's had long-term experience with this over 15 years. And the church grew by 1,000 people every single year, every time they opened one of those facilities. And the feedback was always, they were known in the community as the church who provided all these different things from, and every campus was different because it depended on what the community needed, but they were known for that. And people liked going to these locations during the week, and it grew the church to 10, 12,000 while he was there.
Man, that was awesome. I say this to a lot of people. This is kind of an old like startup saying, but they say, first time founders of a startup are going to focus on their products. They're going to focus on, making sure that every piece of their software is exactly. And a lot of times what ended up happening is you forget about the person you're actually selling that to. And I know that sounds so crazy, like you're building this product and it's all you're obsessed about, and you forget that it's actually for a person. You know what I mean? You have your objective and you build this whole thing, and then you forget like, oh, I've got to sell this to somebody. Like somebody's got to actually want to use this for us to actually be viable. Right. And, funny as that is, a lot of people that are starting churches, or they're getting this idea now where they're like, man, I'm listening to Nathan and Justin talk about this. There's no way that I'm not activating my space in my community now. And what I tell people is, hey, learn from somebody that's already done this. Learn from somebody that's helped a lot of people do the exact same thing. First time founders focus on the product. Second time founders focused on their distribution channels. And that's going to drive us back again to, before you get started in this, the main thing is always going to be the main thing. What does your community need?
Amen.
right? How can you transform your building to be what your community needs? And how is it possible to do that? So in that same kind of vein, any organization that's like getting started or moving forward in this process, and they're like, man, I absolutely want to begin to activate my space and have more impact in my community. What would be some of the hurdles that you've seen people have to face? Some things that it's just good to get your ducks in a row on the front end this way before you really step into that. And I know that could be another hour-long conversation, but just some of the key points.
Some of the key points. Well, and before I go there, you said something I really want to expound upon. Again, it goes back to the Target ebook, but one of the things I wrote in the book was what I feel made Target successful was they discovered the difference between convenience and relevance. Convenience is taking something someone may or may not want and making it more accessible. Relevance is helping people find exactly what they're looking for when they need it most. We can do that on the digital front. I also think we can do that with our buildings, but that's the goal, relevance. How do we help people find what they're looking for when they need it most? If we do that, we're going to have a better opportunity of being able to present them with the gospel of Jesus Christ.
Absolutely.
So the things that I find that preclude people from moving forward in this is not having a financial house in order. There is some one of the most important things in this conversation. Everybody asks, well, can you do this? Is this legal? Does it trigger? Aren't we a nonprofit? All that is manageable, but it does take someone who knows what they're doing to set that up. But in short, if it's a small amount of revenue, it's fine to run through your church. If you start getting into bigger numbers, it is perfectly fine for a 501c3 to own a for-profit entity and run all the business through that separate from the church. So getting your governance and tax structure in place is incredibly important. And the third thing I would say is, again, don't jump on the first opportunity that pops up. Somebody comes in and says, oh, I'd love to have a classical school here. Take a big step back. Don't let opportunities define strategy. Don't let opinions drive strategy. Take a big step back. And there is a process of how you engage in getting the information that you need to ensure that there is demand for whatever you're going to put in that space, vetting those potential operators and leaders. And I mean, I think we could spend 2 hours actually going through what that looks like.
Absolutely. But, maybe we should. Yeah, maybe we should. We should just create a little something. Yeah.
But that's where I would start. And I would say this too, from a leadership perspective. I mean, this is, we've fallen so in love with our buildings as a church that we do. Believe it or not, Justin, pushback I get sometimes on this is it okay, from a generosity standpoint that the building is supported by something other than tithes. I was like, tithes go to the church. The church is the people. The buildings is the tool. Ridiculous argument. But I think from a vision standpoint, I think you do have to take your time and make sure you're walking people through what this does and how, and getting some alignment on it, because it is different than what we did. Right now, we're building the church of 2033, not the church of 2013. And there's still a paradigm adjustment that's taking place. And I think we have to lead well in explaining to our people what we're doing and what the vision and mission is behind it.
Man, absolutely. I was listening to Jeff Bezos talk the other day, and he was saying that when he sits down with companies, and if you're talking to Jeff Bezos, you're probably further along in your startup journey than most people, right? And he says, I'll sit down and I'll listen to what people are doing, and I always hear all these solutions that people are building, and they're always so cool and they're always so intricate, and they have to do with what people are going to be wanting in the next 10 years. And they're saying the market is shifting this way, so we're going to create X, Y, and Z to address this market that is emerging. And he says, man, that's awesome. And people make so much money in doing that. He said, however, for me, I want to focus on what I know people are still going to want in 10 years. And he's like, at Amazon, I can define it by three things. Number one, people are always going to want more stuff. They're going to want a bigger selection. Number two, they're always going to want it to get to their house faster. And they're always going to want to pay less for it. So if I can find more products, if I can find a way to get them faster, and if I can make them more affordable, and I just focus on those three things, Amazon is going to be relevant and viable till the end of time if I'm focusing on those three things. And I think that it's the exact same thing for us, right? Like, we are building and really working in industry through a massive paradigm shift. I totally agree with you. But man, I think from the standpoint of communities, they are still going to want more access to buildings. There's always going to be community needs without question, and they're going to look for people in the communities as resources to find them or to fill those needs. And so if the church can focus on that, if we can just say, are we a relevant resource? Have we built an infrastructure that supports that? And are we approaching that community and get hyper focused on those three things? That's something your community is always going to desire.
Well, I agree. And speaking of a need that won't change, Justin, like here's something I believe, and I believe it from my own experience, because I cannot like overemphasize how much I hated church and hated Christians and had such a bad experience. Here's what I learned in becoming a Christian. We were created by God and for God. Inside of us, inside of every human being, whether they know Jesus or not, we were literally designed. I'm going to reference John Ortberg here, and he says that we were created with an insatiable desire to consume that was designed as a counterpoint to his insatiable desire to give. And so when we aren't in relationship with Jesus, we're trying to put water into a gas engine with money and relationships and things. Every person in our communities was inherently designed, not just by God, but for him. They want Jesus, even if they don't know it. And we are the ones that create the barriers of entry and saying that the only way that you can get him is to come here at 9:00 on Sunday morning. And that's not the church that Jesus built, man. Like, it's just not the church. We didn't even have buildings for 300 years. Yep. So to me, I want to get back to that point where I'm getting in front of more people and I'm relevant to more people, because what I know about the person I'm talking to, regardless of where their relationship is with Jesus, is that they were designed for Jesus and inherently want him. I don't care what I have to do, but I'm going to stop putting the barriers of entry to Jesus on a static time, one day a week, and open up the doors of community so people can meet Jesus any time of the week. Like, that is where I think this is going, bro.
Yeah, man. 100%, dude. And I love what you're doing too. The conversation that we had about, getting your stuff in order, and in building infrastructure and all those kinds of things. And I say this a lot, but, for one, your culture is going to trump your vision, period. Like, you can tell me how bad you want to impact your community, but if nothing inside of your community is actually impacting your community, then your culture has just trumped your vision. How often do you see a mission statement from a church and then you walk in and nothing that they talked about in that mission statement or vision statement is actually there? And it just kind of goes to show that your culture is going to trump your vision. And the other part of this is, are you going to rise to the level of your goals, or are you going to fall to the level of your infrastructure? Like, if you say I'm gonna lose 25 pounds, well, losing that 25 pounds is awesome, but gaining 50 the next month is kind of, sort of a zero-sum game there. You know what I mean? It's not a great thing, right? And so I think that having that conversation about, getting your infrastructure put in place. I was talking to somebody way, way high up in a massive denomination, one of the biggest 3 denominations in the United States. And I was having the conversation about the people in their organization and how they were using space. And we got into the concept of space together. And he told me that 67% of all of the people that had tried to share their space in their denomination had resulted in defaults. And I know exactly why that is. It's because they don't have the proper infrastructure put in place. If we were talking to pastors and we said, hey guys, we think it's really important for you guys to launch a new small group. Man, when they did, there'd be so much planning that went into that. There would be so much like, hey, we're going to talk about this for 6 weeks and then this for 6 weeks. And then this person's going to lead this and it's going to be at these houses, or it's going to be in this room at the church. And we're going to try to get this many people in each one of them. It'd be so much planning. And that'd be to launch a small group. So adding a new revenue stream and a new part of your organization, I want to be clear and just be honest when saying that it's not like an overnight thing. Like, it is something that you want to have infrastructure built in, and you want to start a process of really understanding what you're getting into so that you don't end up having a bad experience trying to impact your community. And so if people are kind of on that journey and they're saying, hey, I want to start impacting my community by sharing my space, by getting more activated into the community around them, what are some resources that you provide? How could they get in touch with you to start having that conversation?
Well, and I mean this in all sincerity, Justin, and I'm not just saying this because you're my friend and you're having me on your podcast, but like, to me too, it's why it's such a no-brainer to use space together, because like what I do is harder. It's more disruptive to a church, just because we're talking about more committed spaces. I mean, for what Space Together costs and for what it does and how it takes that off, like, I mean, there's no reason not to start on a journey like that soon. As far as resources go, we always do a free analysis. We always want to meet with a church and see what they're doing. And we're not there to pitch you. We're either a good fit or not. But we always want to serve the church that reaches out to us and has questions. So, I mean, that'd be the first thing. Just know that we're willing to have a conversation and would love to hear the vision that you have for your space. If it is more of a flexible space, obviously Justin is your guy. But if you're thinking about some bigger uses and thinking about like really how to maximize the entirety of the space and what the financial structure needs to look like and tax and governance issues and all that, reach out. If we can help you, great. If it means that we're in a relationship with you for longer, that's great too. But really, we're just here to serve. We're here to really push this concept forward and we just welcome a conversation with you.
What's the best way for people to reach out to you?
I will give you my email address. And it is Nathan, Art, A-R-T-T, at ministry-solutions.com. And that will get you to me directly.
Tremendous. And same thing, just to follow up there, guys, if you are kind of just dipping your toes into this, you're just thinking about getting started, we offer a really inexpensive $500 space sharing training where we go through everything from figuring out why you're actually sharing your building and where you find yourself on that spectrum. And then we go into everything. Let's actually find out what you have. Let's make sure you have the proper agreements, that you're doing this in a safe way. And we'll help you begin that process of activating your space. And you won't just be working with pastors. You'll have all kinds of people in dance studios and martial arts gyms and commercial kitchens and all sorts of folks that we serve. So, man, Nathan, I just want to say, man, thank you so much for spending some time. That was absolutely tremendous. I think there was some really good things in there for folks that are going to listen to this. And again, just want to say thank you so much. And everybody that's kind of listening to this, be on the lookout. We'll go ahead and give somewhat of a shameless plug, but we're actually going to put together an event. Nathan and I are going to put this and do this together along with some other friends. And we're just going to be talking about this subject of activating your spaces and creating more impact. So keep on the lookout. We'll have more in store. I'm sure this won't be the last interview that we do together. And so thank you all for listening. Absolutely. Nathan, thank you so much, man. It was tremendous.
I appreciate you, Justin. Thank you so much.
Absolutely, man. Thanks. Bye.